Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Preparations are underway for the Derek Chauvin trial. Our exclusive interview with the organization funding his defense.
We feel strong in the case.
Plus, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives calling for reform and new legislation.
You have to acknowledge a problem.
The accused killer of rapper Nipsey Hussle is asking for a bail reduction. Is Eric Holder a danger to the community? And the $1 billion in settlement one university will pay out to sex assault victims of a former campus gynecologist. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin and Anjanette Levy. We begin with team coverage of the Derek Chauvin trial. Anjanette leads us off with an exclusive interview with the man who has the organization that's paying for Chauvin's defense.
Hey, Brian, the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association lobbies for pro-law enforcement legislation in the state, and the group also has a legal defense fund for its members. I spoke with the executive director about a number of issues, including Minnesota's Attorney General and what he believes are the strengths in Chauvin's case.
This is such a very important case, and the world is watching.
Brian Peters has led the MPPOA since 2019. Nothing could have prepared Peters for what happened on May 25, 2020, when a video of George Floyd's arrest recorded by a teenage girl went viral.
You asked me earlier what I thought of the video. When I first saw it, it was hard to watch.
But Peters says his opinion on that video started to change after he watched the police body camera video that showed the beginning of the encounter with George Floyd.
Evidence wasn't released right away. And when I started looking at the evidence, also being able to watch all of the body camera video, things started to change. And being experienced in law enforcement, not everything is what it seems to be just from one aspect of a video.
Peters won't comment on the officer's actions that day, but he believes the body camera video, the medical examiner's report, and the officer's training all helped their cases. He questions why Attorney General Keith Ellison didn't want the body camera released in the beginning.
I sat on a working group called How to Reduce Deadly Force Encounters. And this was led by our Attorney General and our Commissioner of Public Safety. We met for 9 months, and this is pre-George Floyd. Our Attorney General spoke of needing transparency in these cases, meaning release of body camera video as soon as possible, making sure that these investigations don't take years, to go from investigation to conclusion at court.
Peters also questions why Ellison wanted to keep cameras out of the courtroom.
We want to make sure that the facts are the facts and people can make up their own decision themselves instead of relying on whether it's a media report or a statement from the Attorney General. People are going to be able to see the facts firsthand.
The stakes couldn't be higher, and the meaning of justice couldn't be more different for the Floyd family and Derek Chauvin. Only a murder conviction will mean justice for the Floyds. For Derek Chauvin, it's an acquittal. Lawyer Eric Nelson is defending Chauvin. He's one of 12 lawyers the MPPOA has vetted to defend officers. 3 other lawyers are defending Thomas Lane, Alexander King, and Tu Tao.
Even though each attorney representing the individual has different parts within the case, it does all come together that, of course, all 4 attorneys were working very hard with each other. We feel strong in the case. I think if the Attorney General's office felt the same, I don't understand why they need as many attorneys on this case as they do.
So do you think that there is any room for reform within the Minneapolis Police Department?
Absolutely. I think there's room for reform across the United States. But as I stated earlier, there's also a lot of room for reform at our legislative bodies, whether it's at the state or federal level, really working on some of these decade-long problems that nobody seems to be able to fix.
And Peter said those problems include drug abuse, inequities in education, and poverty. He didn't want to comment on specific aspects of the case right now because of Judge Cahill's warnings, and you saw how upset he got over the last week or so with the city of Minneapolis and the comments city officials have been making there. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Many in law enforcement disagree with Chauvin's actions that day. Terry Austin has more on the head of a national organization who is looking to see accountability.
Brian, I spoke with Linda Williams, the president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. She says the incident inspired her organization to call for legislation mandating intervention by officers when they see another officer using excessive force.
In 30 years of being a special agent with the United States Secret Service, I was very good, never put anybody on the ground, never laid on anybody's neck. Even when there was an arrest that was effected, it was done properly and humane, because law enforcement is that entity in society that has been given that ultimate authority to use death as an as a final resolution. It does not come to that. We have to be accountable for the training, and those people that lack or do not do that, they have to be held accountable. And I know it's simple, but it's just a mom, and just to hear a man cry for his mother. But the fact is, you had him under control, so why are you still, at that point, utilizing excessive force? We have to, Terry, everybody, have to reimagine law enforcement. Public safety is more than a gun and a badge. It's us taking pride and, reinvesting into our communities. And that's a holistic approach.
Thanks, Terry. Let's bring in criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona on this as well. Bernarda, what did you make of the comments there in Terry's interview where you have how do you get better experience in Special Forces of the United States of America in talking about when force should or shouldn't be used and when it's excessive?
This conversation is a conversation that we have been having for years. We have been having this same conversation for over 10, 20, 30 years, and it still has remained the same. Change has only come little by little. At some point, come on, you're going to keep on having situations like that of George Floyd who died. These are situations that we hear all around the country. At some point, this has to stop. How do we get there? Is it by suing people and getting money by the city? Is it by taking away qualified immunity? Is it by the criminal cases? Something has to give.
Agreed. Terry, what did you make of Brian Peters' measured response on the case of Derek Chauvin?
Well, Peters is probably being very careful for a couple of reasons. First, he knows that the world is watching, and he probably wants to make sure that he's being fair and that he's being impartial, even though obviously he has one point of view. And second, he knows Judge Cahill has already cautioned all the parties to limit their comments, and even as it applies to the press, not just to the parties. So I think he's being very careful, and he's being neutral if he can be.
Now, Anjanette, Brian Peters seemed to be pretty critical of the Attorney General, Keith Ellison. I take there's no love lost between the two of them?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like that, but we had a really long conversation, Brian, about 35 or 40 minutes. And he said he simply just has a lot of questions for the Attorney General. As you heard him say, they worked on that panel together to reduce use of force incidents. They had worked on some possible reforms that they recommended to the state legislature up there in Minnesota. And then the Floyd case happened and everything kind of fell apart. So he said even today he would still sit down and talk with the Attorney General. He just has a lot of questions regarding his handling of this particular case.
Of course, the concept of reform will be hanging over this trial as it begins in the coming days. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the suspect accused of killing Grammy winner rapper Nipsey Hussle wants out of jail. But first, the shocking evidence the jury in the George Floyd case is expected to hear. Did Derek Chauvin order a woman to be hogtied who wasn't resisting arrest? Welcome back. Opening statements in the Derek Chauvin murder trial are scheduled to start on Monday. Law and Crime's Kim Johnson is in Minneapolis and explains what evidence is expected to come in.
Brian, when the trial gets underway next week, the jury will be allowed to hear about Derek Chauvin's previous police action. In one previous arrest, Chauvin received a life-saving award for placing a handcuffed man on his side, an action which hospital staff later told him saved the man's life. This week, Judge Peter Cahill ruled that the incident was important because it showed Chauvin's knowledge reasonable force in a similar incident to what George Floyd experienced sentenced in May 2020. The jury will also hear about another arrest in 2017 when Chauvin placed a woman in a hog tie, even though she was not resisting arrest. As evidence is presented in court next week, family and friends of George Floyd are hoping for a guilty verdict.
I hope that the police officer do some jail time, because when you look at the video, everybody telling him he can't breathe. He's saying he need help. The officer continued to put his knee in his neck. I feel the time he told him he was claustrophobic and he couldn't breathe, they should have set him on the curb, called for paramedics.
Now, George Floyd's friend tells me that he thinks the racial makeup of the jury, which includes 6 people of color, is fair, and he says that he hopes justice is served. Brian.
Thanks, Kim. Here to break down the judge's ruling and the makeup of the jury is criminal defense attorney Bernardo Villalona and Terry Austin. Terry, do you agree with Floyd's friend? Does the racial makeup of the jury appear fair to you?
I do agree. I think that it's not only racially diverse, but you have 9 women, 6 men. And the fact that you do have 6 of the 15 jurors who are from diverse backgrounds. I also think it's important that they have different professions. So you have someone who is an auditor, you have someone who is a chemist, you have a single mom. Those types of perspectives will be important when they're doing deliberations. You're going to want to hear everyone's opinion. So I think the diversity is excellent. And I think they did a good job, frankly, of picking people who will at least try to be fair.
Bernardo, what do you make of the judge's ruling to include prior acts by Chauvin?
So I'm not surprised at the judge's ruling. Remember that the prosecution in this case actually was seeking to put in 8 of Chauvin's prior bad acts into evidence. And what the judge decided, which was a fair decision, that only 2 of those acts are going to be allowed in front of the jury, because those 2 acts go to knowledge and intent. Specifically the act where a man was tasered and he was rolled to his side. Because when he was in the hospital, the people at the hospital had stated, had he still been facing the ground for any much longer, that he would have died. So that goes to show you knowledge on the part of Chauvin. He was aware that having Floyd down, face down, with his knee on his neck could cause death.
I mean, it's called a recovery position for a reason. Of course, if this testimony comes in, it's going to be very damaging for the defense. Be sure to tune in to the Law&Crime Network for gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Derek Chauvin murder trial and the death of George Floyd. For more on what's going on at the Law&Crime Network, let's hand it over to Jesse Weber, host of the show Prime Crime.
Yeah, hey there, Brian. Tonight we discuss Sean Great. This is the serial killer who lured women in and then murdered them. We're going to start with the harrowing 911 call of a woman who was able to escape and then dive into the twisted confessions of Great that are really something else.
So I'll help you. I'll just go like this, you know what I mean? Like,
pushing forward and up at the same time.
Right, and she kind of just like whacked my hands and like started flipping out and stuff like that, to the point where I had to just like grab her and I just would lean forward and just press.
And it's those police interviews that help to tell this chilling story. Tune in to Law and Crime.
Thanks, Jesse. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, $1.1 billion, a record settlement for the hundreds of women who accuse a USC gynecologist of decades of sexual abuse. Plus, the accused killer of rapper Nipsey Hussle is back in court. His legal arguments to reduce bail, the latest in the case, next. Attorneys for the man accused of shooting and killing rapper Nipsey Hussle are asking for his $6.5 million bail to be reduced. The Grammy-nominated rapper was gunned down outside his Los Angeles clothing store in April 2019. Police say Eric Holder walked up to him and the two had a conversation about Hussle accusing Holder of snitching. Holder left, but prosecutors say he returned, shooting multiple rounds into Hussle's head and torso. Holder pled not guilty to 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and weapons charges. Now, his attorneys say he's not a flight risk and deserves a lower bond.
How about the discovery?
Well, Ms. Young and I are going to meet and confer with the investigating officer over these items. And so I would think by the time we come back on the 6th, we will have this settled. And if not, I think we can either discuss what is unsettled at that time or maybe.
Well, if it's not settled, are you going to file something in response to her motion, or?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay.
Back with us is criminal defense attorney Bernardo Villalona and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, $6.5 million is high, but that's better than the remand we typically see in homicide cases, right?
Yes, it is. But you know what, Brian? I think he should have been remanded to jail. This was a blatant and bold killing of someone who was held in extreme high regard for the community. And we know that Holder had a criminal conviction, and that was for carrying a concealed firearm. And the fact that he came back after an argument, was shooting with 2 different guns in 2 different hands, I think that that was just such a heinous crime. And frankly, I think the judge could have easily remanded him. So I'm hoping that the bail stays at a very high mark.
Bernardo, as you know, strength of a case is a factor that most courts typically consider for bail. But is there a strong argument to have bond reduced here?
There's no reason to reduce the bond in this case. There has not been a change in circumstances. He is awaiting trial, so it's not like any of the counts have been dismissed. So when it comes to California and setting bail, there's a computation system that they use. It's $1 million off the top, just if you're facing life, if you were to be convicted of the sentence. It's another additional $1 million if you are the shooter. It's another $1 million if you have, depending on your prior record. So it is the best computation that you use, even though bail is only supposed to be to assure the return to court. But also you got to think about the public safety.
Yeah, it is, of course, a factor that they put in. And thank you for that, Bernardo, for showing us how that calculus breaks down. I would agree. With no change of circumstances, I don't see his bail reducing unless something in his case drastically changes. But of course, we'll keep eyes on that case. Thank you both. When we come back, how did the alleged Boulder store shooter obtain the weapon that left 10 dead? The new facts we are learning about Ahmad Alissa. Welcome back. New information in the Boulder store shooting case as we learn the suspect passed a background check and legally purchased the alleged murder weapon just 6 days before the deadly rampage. Ahmad Alissa is facing 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Prosecutors say they plan to file more attempted murder charges after 10 people were killed at the King Superstore. According to police, 1 officer fired at the suspect. That officer is now on paid administrative leave. Officials say law enforcement's response saved additional lives.
The officer, an 11-year Boulder Police Department veteran, was not injured during this incident. The firearm used by the suspect in King Supers on March 22nd is a semi-automatic Ruger AR 5.56 pistol. It was legally purchased in a gun store in Arvada, Colorado. The defendant was also in possession of a 9mm handgun, but at this time we do not believe that gun was used in this incident.
The University of Southern California will pay out more than $1 billion to sexual assault victims of a former campus gynecologist. Ex-Dr. George Tyndall worked at the USC Student Health Clinic from 1989 until 2016. That's when allegations he had been abusing students and taking photos of their genitals without their knowledge were made public in an LA Times investigation. He has pled not guilty to 29 felony charges and is awaiting trial. Those settlements cover more than 700 plaintiffs. It's the largest sex abuse payout in higher education history. I mean, Bernardo, some of the details here are astounding. $1.1 billion settlement over 3 multiple settlements, scandal after scandal. The university officials calling it, quote, the end of a painful and ugly chapter in the history of the university. What are your thoughts on the settlement?
So, of course, the amount itself shows you that there was culpability on the side of the college. But I will tell you this, the problem is that the college was well aware of this Doctors Act since the 90s, and it wasn't until 2016 that they decided to take action against this doctor and have him removed. So for the college to have failed those ladies, I think it's the right settlement. If not, they should actually get more, because in reality is that they will never forget what they went through.
Absolutely. Hundreds of victims, as you said earlier. The most recent settlement, because I said there's more than one, women will see payouts from $250,000 to several million. Terry, how do you think that the breakdown of these settlements are working out in favor of these women?
Well, I think the large amounts are worth it because the amount of physical and emotional distress that they went through, considering the fact these are students. I taught out at USC after Dr. Tyndale was there, but during the class action. And I heard students talking about the ramifications of what he did when he was at the school. So it might sound like an astronomical figure, but I think it is, as Bernarda says, somewhat of an admission that the university failed to protect these students. When you have your child go off to school, the last thing you think about is the fact that they might be abused by someone at the school. So I think it's the right amount, and I think it's a great thing that the school is settling because they're acknowledging that they don't need to put these women through a trial, which would cause even more emotional distress.
I mean, personally, I find it disgusting, especially as an NCAA, or I guess former NCAA college athlete myself. When you go to these schools, you're supposed to be welcomed into a family. You're supposed to be protected by athletic trainers, by coaches, by the university. As you go out there and you try to do your best in a sport that you love to represent that school, it's maddening and sickening to hear that young women in college had to go through this. I'm glad they got their civil court case resolved, and I look forward to seeing how the criminal case is resolved as well. Thank you both, and thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.